Thank you, Taos, once again for coming out for Misfits, Malcontents, and Mystics. It makes me so happy to see all of you here tonight. Really, truly. Misfits, Malcontents, and Mystics began organically over a year ago now, basically because I love writing. And I didn't have a venue necessarily to showcase all these writers in the way that I thought that they should be. The other thing that Misfits is it's a celebration of Taos. Yeah, it's this place that we live. Yeah. I traveled a lot when I was younger, and it took me a while to find home. Every single day when I wake up, I'm still so grateful to look at that mountain, to look at this landscape, to see exactly where we are. And it's not just the views, it's the people, right? It's the community that makes this place. Yeah. So tonight's Misfits is to benefit the Shared Table of Taos. Yeah. Now, while you're driving into town, maybe whether you're coming from the south end or the north, every other Wednesday you see this enormous line of people out there on the highway. And when I first moved to town, I was curious at just what this throng of people were. And it didn't take me very long to find out what those people were doing were getting food. And a very basic necessity and something that a lot of people in our community do not have. Steve Wired has headed up the Shared Table for, I don't know, close to, 20 years now? Yeah. So yeah. And I'm just going to ask Steve to come up right now and just tell you a little bit about the Shared Table before we kick it off here. There he is. Steve Wired.
Thank you, Clint. I really appreciate that. I want to say a special thanks and shout out to Clint for all his work, putting this together, making it happen. That's unique. And I really like the Misfits, Malcontents, and Mystics. That's kind of what Taos is and who we are. We like that. I want to say thank you to my fellow readers tonight who've taken the time to put together their own stories. And I want to thank our Presbyterian friends who partner with us at Shared Table, my advisory council, my board, the people that support us. And we got a small staff. Shout out to Eve Tovino, my kitchen manager, Mike Flaherty. And we got great volunteers and donors. And you people tonight, I'm telling you, you get a preacher here with over 250 people, I could preach and take an offering. And we could just do it. But I wanted to say, Shared Table began in 1994. We distribute food commodities twice a month on the second and fourth Wednesday every month. We're not really a soup kitchen, but we provide commodities, and several years ago we started distributing basic health care items, and that has made a difference in people's lives as well. School supplies. Yesterday we gave out school supplies to children on both ends of town, and I'm telling you, I used to teach high school for 18 years in eastern Kansas. There's nothing like making kids happy, getting some new supplies. When you see a third grader with new notebooks, pencils, that makes all the difference. I don't want kids to get embarrassed when they go to school. So we just try to give affirmation and goodwill to people and never want them to feel desperate. You know, we can't do everything. We're not the only place in town that does good work, but we're one of them. And tonight's for us, and we thank you for that. And I really thank you for coming, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Our first reader is also our youngest reader, and the next Misfits 3 months from now is youth-oriented, and it's going to be entirely produced, written, and put on by the youth of Taos. This youth, however, I was just in a play with her that was written by Ned Doherty, and the joke about Michaela Vogel is that she's more adult than the adults. She definitely had her stuff together more than I did. So I thought that it would just fit better if she read with the adults tonight. Michaela Vogel.
Hello, everybody. Okay. I start my senior year at Taos High School tomorrow. So I think it's only appropriate that I tell a story going all the way back to my freshman year. Let's set the stage. I've only ever seen high school in movies, and now I'm living it. The most important time of my life is just starting. I don't know anybody at the high school, therefore, I am a nobody at the high school. I've only ever been to schools where there's more or less 100 kids total. Now I'm in Taos, the big city, where there's about 400 kids at the high school, and all of them are way cooler than me. I get lost on my first day of school trying to find all my classes. The class that I've been waiting for all day finally rolls around, drama. It's in the strangest part of the building. I have to go all the way down the darkest hallway till I get to 2 double doors, which are covered by black paper. Before opening the doors, I take a moment. What if this isn't at all how I expected it to go? What if taking drama class makes me the biggest nerd in school and then everybody hates me? Okay, shut up, it's fine. Don't be a wimp. Just open the doors. Before opening the doors, I just take a deep breath. I walk into the little theater and there's students sitting on the floor, laughing and smiling. Little did I know that I'd just walked through the doors that would make me the happiest I've ever been. Okay, picking up with the controller and fast forwarding through the movie that is my life, we stop at my first audition and casting for The Tempest. I have to memorize something from Shakespeare. How the hell? What is perfidious? I audition only knowing about half the monologue I should know. I'm pretty sure I just bombed that audition. Fast forward through the week, and the cast list is posted outside the classroom. Wait, I'm Trinculo? Who's Trinculo? I'm a man? I'm playing the part of a man? Turns out, Trinculo is part of the comedic relief of The Tempest. And the more I learned my character, the more I enjoyed turning into the man I am today. Rehearsals were every day after school, and we had 15 minutes to go get a snack before we started. Being the loser freshman that I was always bumming rides off the really cool seniors of the drama class. I became closer with my cast every day when we'd scramble to get snacks and still arrive at rehearsal late. Obviously, making friends with seniors automatically made me cooler, right? I won't mention their names because it's not important in case they don't want to be affiliated with me, but let me just say that we were very close. I don't think I ever put more time and effort into another class than I have in drama. Working with my cast to create something that we were all proud of was something I'd never really experienced before. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as big of a loser as I thought. I mean, I had friends now, and some of them are older than me, so that's cool. I must be pretty cool. When performance time rolled around, I had fully transformed from a 14-year-old girl into a middle-aged drunken sailor. I was ready to reveal myself to the world. The first performance was for our fellow students at Taos High School, and that's by far the hardest audience to perform for. This was my first time performing at the TCA. The space seemed so much bigger than the miniature theater at our school. It was like going from Barbie's playhouse to Barbie's mansion with the pink convertible and everything. I'm sitting backstage putting on my costume, applying my facial hair. The mirrors are just like the ones in the movies, where the lights surround the mirror and make you feel like a star. I'm staying considerably calm, considering all the football players and cheerleaders are about to watch me make a fool out of myself on stage. Not only am I calm, but I'm actually kind of excited. There's a moment where I wait to go on stage, that I'm hiding behind the curtains trying not to peek, where life turns slow motion, just like the Matrix. This is the moment where I channel my inner Johnny Depp. I go through a metamorphosis to become a rather Jack Sparrow like Trinculo. Now that I'm a fully intoxicated, bearded male, I take the stage. And the crowd goes wild. Except not really, because, well, I'm performing for high school students, and they don't really fully understand Shakespearean jokes. But the fact that my character was so drunk, it helped, because obviously being drunk to high school students is hilarious. After my first performance, I got a lot of comments like, "Wow, that was you? I couldn't even tell. You looked just like a man. You played drunk really well. Oh, and I loved your mustache." I took these compliments with grace, but was it actually a good thing they couldn't tell I was actually a girl? Do I just have a manly way about me, or did I actually do a good job acting? I decided it was because I was a comedic genius and because my acting was adequate. The rest of the performances went by like a breeze. Each night I looked forward to making my facial hair that much better, lacing up my sailor boots, and filling my empty wine bottle with fake booze. My first performance with high school opened me up to the theater community of Taos. I started to put myself out there, and thanks to various productions, they brought me closer to this town. I'm proud to call myself a Tauseño. The Tempest turned me from a nobody into a somebody. And let me just say that in high school, that's a big deal. Starting tomorrow, I will become a big, bad senior. With lots of experience underneath my belt, I'm all grown up now. I don't think there's anything else to really learn. If I can memorize Shakespeare lines, I don't need anything else in life, do I? I'll be looking at those freshmen with a smile on my face, knowing that I'm no longer a loser like them. There's no better feeling than knowing who you are, and I'm someone that enjoys putting on costumes and acting drunk in front of hundreds of people. I would never know who I was if I hadn't walked through those little theater doors on my first day of high school. Thank you.
You good, Robin? Cool. Interesting, Michaela also wound up playing a drunk in Escape Plans. Bob Andrews plays New Orleans-style piano, jazz. He's pretty good. And he plays at the Taos Inn often, where I work. So I got to listen to him, and I got to know him a little bit. But I didn't really get to know him until poetry night, in which I was reading. Now, I'm pretty modest, mostly. But I like praise. And after this particular evening, nobody lauded more praise upon me than Bob. He just kept telling me how much he loved it. And he said, we should get together, and I wish that you would write some lyrics for me. And I thought, okay. Now I was thinking, when I asked Bob to read, because he told me that it would be a difficult task for him, I thought, what if Bob were to ask me to get up and play piano? I wouldn't do a very good job. But we're going to see how Bob does tonight as he takes the stage for Misfits, Malcontents, and Mystics. Bob Andrews.
I'm going to get my phone out so I don't go over 8 minutes, because as you know, I can just check my emails at what the same time exactly. Okay, here we go. I'm going to press the start button. Okay, anybody knows who I am? I'm a piano player. I improvise, so I'm not reading per se at the moment. I'm going to actually tell some stories, go through a thread of my life that brought me here. As you see, I'm not from New Mexico. So we'll start from way back when. My father was in the Signal Corps during this World War II in the desert. He drove motorbikes, and he had a big signal pack on his back and that kind of thing. And when the American and British armies went through Sicily, he was assigned to the American Army as a signal liaison, not an officer, but just a regular soldier. And instead of having the horrible sort of bully beef and biscuits that the British rations were, he got nylons, he got peanut butter, he got condoms, he got all this stuff which opened his eyes to America for the very first time. Now, I have since discovered there's more to America than those items, but it kind of put a thing in his mind about it, and I think I got a spirit from him to actually discover where America was and come here. And actually, I've worked here quite a lot. Most of my life, I came here in 1970 to New York. Did a lot of tours, did a lot of things in playing music. Moved to New Orleans in the late 80s, lived there for 25 years. I learned how to sing in an American accent, which was actually marvelous because it got me somewhere where if you sing in an English accent, it just sounds terrible. You know, if you bring, you know, some of these things that you do. So I also married an American, which my father was really pleased about. But unfortunately, he passed away before he was able to come to America to actually see it for himself. And so I guess I kind of lived his dream a bit for it, and somehow I got an affinity for this place. It grabbed me, and I lived. Like I say, an American, I became Americanized even before I even knew what it was. I had Thanksgiving and stuff. I thought, Thanksgiving, what the heck's that? Why should I celebrate the 4th of July? What the heck is all this about? But it's sort of, I became that sort of person, and I kind of, and gradually I got used to it. I said tomato and things like this. It all became very, very Americanized. And so I then lived there for 25 years. I learned how to play piano, which I'm grateful for living in New Orleans. New Orleans is a beautiful music town. I got divorced, and then somehow I wound up in New Mexico through a sort of following another person here. And we landed in Albuquerque, and the lady said, "Oh, we should go up to Taos because it's quite beautiful up there, and I love to ski." And I said, "Well, I don't ski. What do I want to go to Taos for?" So we drove up here, and the first time I came up the canyon and I saw the gorge, and I saw this beautiful mesa, and I saw the mountain, I was not that impressed, actually. Because basically it was not a very nice day. It was going to snow on the mountain by the look of it. In fact, we drove up the valley, and it started to snow, and I went, "Oh, blimey, snow. I haven't lived in snow for 25 years. And so anyway, 3 hours later, we're in the realtor's office buying a house. So, you know, go figure that. So then I was living partly in Albuquerque, partly in Taos, and I was coming up a lot more, and I started meeting some wonderful people here. And gradually, the beauty of the place sort of started to overwhelm me a bit. And so when the person in question that I came to New Mexico with, we parted company, I came to Taos. That was what I did. I said, I'm going to Taos and I'm going to go live there because it's just this magical place. It's exhilarating for an artist to come in. And I look myself as an artist because I'm making it up as I go along. You know, this is what I'm doing at the moment. I'd love to have brought my notes out, and I completely forgot to take them out. But we'll put them on there for a minute. But I love the fact that I could come here and be accepted for what I was, which was basically quite an older guy playing music and in a very small town. I was born in a place called Horsforth, which is a very small village where everyone knew everybody's business. And Taos has got a little bit of that going for it, which is kind of, I actually felt very comfortable with that. I don't mind people knowing who I am or saying, being in Smith's or Sid's or wherever I'm going, and, you know, hey, how you going? Hey, it takes me 20 minutes to get in and out, kind of thing. And I've also met some beautiful people here who've taught me, one particular person has taught me to acknowledge what the magic of this place, the actual, I'm lost for words now. Wait a minute, I've got to think of some. the magnetic pull of this place. It's when you go away. I've been touring quite a lot, kind of living in Taos. In fact, I'll actually say this. I lived in Taos for this past 2.5 years on my own, something I hadn't done since I was 19, and that was a few years ago. But it's something that was kind of an interesting thing for me to be able to sort of be here and have that space all to myself suddenly. And that's when I started to see that was more to Taos than just going to the Taos Inn and getting Clint to get me a beer. It was a sort of a, but it's. So you get, with so much art going on, with so many, you get to meet artists, you get to meet different kinds of artists, painters and sculptors and photographers and people who do totally different things for you. It kind of exhilarates you. It kind of makes you go, hey, I could do some of this. I mean, I can't take photographs or paint very well, but it gives me my feeling of being able to translate my feelings into the piano and the keyboards that I do. And it's also opened my mind to a lot of things which I think at my age I can get very stuck in. I'm 67, so I kind of have to look at things in terms of well, I like this and I don't like that. It's sort of there's a sort of definite. I definitely have a pattern to that. Whereas I've learned that it's sort of you can still appreciate new things if you open your mind to it, and that mindfulness and that open-mindedness has come living here, I think. Because when I was living in the city or when I was living in a bigger town, you're too busy. There's too much traffic. There's too much stuff going on. And of course, just the beautiful people here. I mean, the musicians that I've met here are just unbelievable. And I've played with lots of them. It's been a sincere pleasure. So I'm happy here. I'm happy here. I love living here. I don't see me leaving here in any foreseeable future. And thank you for listening to my ramblings, I suppose.
Beautiful, Bob. Thank you. Just like the rest of you, I attended high school for a little bit. And the only class that I ever went to was English class. And in our reading list was the Milagro Beanfield War, which I flatly refused to read for some reason. I had my own ideas about literature. A decade later, I came across it living in Taos, and I was reading it. At the time, well, all the time really, I was fighting with my wife quite hard. And I could not give her an iota of attention because I had my nose buried so deep in that book. I could not put it down. She decided to go to Cape Cod to take a break from me, and she was spending the summer there. And John Nichols was giving a reading and a book signing for the Empanada Brotherhood. And I went, and I bought a copy of the book, and I went up to him and I said, "Mr. Nichols, you damn near ruined my marriage." And that got his attention, and he kind of looked at me and he said, "How's that?" And I told him the story. We were at Brodsky's Books, and he said, "Rick, get this guy a copy of Conjugal Bliss." And the inscription inside to this day, it says, "Clint, good luck with your marriage. I've done it 3 times. John Nichols." So. Tonight we're lucky enough to have John Nichols here reading for us. John Nichols. Is John in the house?
He's lucky I didn't ruin his marriage by sleeping with his wife. I published my first novel, The Sterile Cuckoo, when I was 24 years old. And I just published this book called The Annual Big Arsenic Fishing Contest when I'm 76 years old. So people always ask me, how do you find Taos? And I said, well, just turn south at Fort Garland. This book, The Annual Big Arsenic Fishing Contest, is about a 20-year fishing contest between three idiots. One of them is named Yuri Stone, the other one is named Bubba Baxter, and the narrator doesn't have a name to protect the innocent. And the book is not just about fishing, and so I'm not going to read the fishing parts here. But they have an incredible time on the river for 20 years. All three of them are professional writers also. And mostly they argue, and they grow old, and then they die, except for the narrator. So I want to read a part of this book where the narrator meets one of the women that he's going to be in love with for a long time. Now, I came very close. Where did I put those? Okay. I came very close to losing the annual Big Arsenic Fishing Contest for the first time in only our third competition on October 3rd, 1985, when I snapped my rod tip 20 minutes into the afternoon. By the way, this takes place between Little Arsenic and Big Arsenic up in the Wild River section of the Rio Grande River. When I snapped my rod tip 20 minutes into the afternoon and nearly defaulted the match. That year, Bubba was only 33, Yuri and I had celebrated 45. I was working on 2 screenplays. I'd recently published my 5th novel, and I just married my second wife, Rachel Ivory, an intriguing and no-nonsense person with an IQ off the charts. We'd met over the summer in the war-torn country of Nicaragua, which was fomenting a Sandinista revolution that was being harassed by a Contra Army counterinsurgency supported by Ronald Reagan's right-wing autocracy and the CIA. While on a brief film-oriented research tour there with a small group of lefties supported by a Los Angeles Jesuit council promoting liberation theology, I collided with Rachel, a journalist on assignment for NACLA. We initially came face-to-face, crouching in a trench on the Honduran border while being debriefed by an FSLN colonel on the guerrilla Contra-war situation. I'd call it lust at first sight, no doubt heightened by the surrounding atmosphere of heroic revolution, leftist nation building, a pending United States invasion, and the bristling array of loaded AK-47s guarding us. Back in the USA, I visited Rachel for a week at her San Francisco apartment. Then she passed 5 intoxicating days with me in New Mexico. 3 weeks after that, over a long-distance phone connection, I importuned her to marry me, and she said yes. I don't claim to have made a whole lot of rational decisions during my life, and that certainly wasn't one of them. I'm not being disingenuous here. Reason had nothing to do with our rash decision. Perhaps we tied the knot because the phone sex was great. I loved the sound of her caustic voice, and she considered my edgy sense of humor adorable. Our complementary radical politics stoked the flames. My older daughter, Stephanie, observed, "You are so out of your comfort zone, Dad." She was 16. My other daughter, Naomi, asked, "Am I going to have a stepmother who's younger than my sister?" She was 12. Their mother, Gretchen, who worked for a pottery barn operation in Albuquerque, featuring popular hand-thrown porcelain vessels that reproduced John Keats' immortal Gretchen earned for the gift shops of many art museums back east. About Rachel, she kept mum. What good would it have availed her to kvetch about her ex-husband's prodigious immaturity? I'm guessing that Rachel and I fantasized marriage would be like bungee jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, locked in fevered coitus after smoking a couple of joints and dropping 4 tabs of Purple Owlsley. Obviously, we weren't thinking straight, but not thinking straight is an amazing turn-on. It's so exciting to be out of control, acting impulsively on the blind spontaneity of sexual excess and the untenable lunacy embraced by swearing to cohabit together forever, which may be the most cockamamie concept humanity ever invented. Believe me, we were both enraptured by the provocative luminosity of melodrama and its total lack of self-restraint. Just writing about it propels me into an irregular heartbeat. Rachel was thrice divorced, the mother of 2 almost grown teenage boys living in Alaska right now, gill netting salmon for competing boats. During a prior existence, she'd been a movie critic for the New Orleans Times-Picayune, the manager of a San Antonio art gallery on the Riverwalk, a special ed teacher on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and a painter of diorama backgrounds at the Sam Noble Natural History Museum in Normal, Oklahoma. I know. Needless to say, between marriages, there had been other men. Rachel came with baggage, and so did I. She was 5'6" with green eyes and faintly strawberry-colored hair, a wiry body from working out, riding a bike, jogging, hiking, swimming at the gym, and a languid aura radiating off of her that captured me with an invisible physical embrace that is difficult to describe and was impossible to resist. She reeked of manic energy and erotic lassitude simultaneously. I was 6 years older than Rachel. 4 years later, autumn of 1989, it was me crying uncle as I fled from Rachel Ivory, burned out, impotent, my tail tucked between my legs, my heart locked in atrial fibrillation, my doctors getting rich. I was 49 years old, maybe fatally ill, also fearing for my career. How could marriage be so degrading and confrontational? Rachel had taken me out back to the woodshed and delivered a proper whopping. I don't want to delve into it, though just for the record, I'll reveal that over the previous 4 years, I'd been in an unprecedentedly volatile relationship akin to Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath, except I was the one ready to cram my head into the oven. Don't get me wrong, it takes 2 to tango, and I got to admit I was a jerk. I should have been more open, more sympathetic, more sensitive. Sadly, my problem is I've always had a bad habit of waking up aghast when the infatuation wears off, compulsively asking myself in terror, where am I? What now? Actually, forget that baby talk BS. Just once I should summon enough courage to override my jealousy, my deflated ego, my broken heart. Rachel actually threw me out of the house because she deemed that I had total disregard for the sort of compassion needed to release a kind of vulnerability that is required to build true intimacy between a man and a woman. There were feminist hegemony issues. You are such an uptight cad, she accused repeatedly throughout our tempestuous 4 years together spent constantly at loggerheads. Why can't you understand the difference between passionate codependency and unselfish affection? I can't believe you stuffed one of your ex-husbands, I shouted back at her. It didn't mean anything, she yelled. I was just feeling bored. Love is not defined by erections. You don't own me. Then for 20 minutes she spewed at me invective originally coined by Betty Friedan, Susan Brown, Miller, Angela Davis, and Shulamit Firestone. But we're married, I sobbed, mortified. We promised to be true. I am true, her scalding tongue insisted. True has nothing to do with genitalia. You act as if tenderness is illegal. Screwing like banshees doesn't prove anything. Lust is fun, but it's not forever. If you would honestly give yourself up to me like an adult, I'd respond in kind, but I can't stand your ornery, obsessive desire for total control over me, you country bumpkin. I will not be a submissive puppy in your patriarchy. I beseeched her not to be that way. I knew what I was losing, and I couldn't bear the thought. I had become a prisoner of her typhoon. Anger is an aphrodisiac. I went down on my knees, a puling figment of my former self. The background music was our maladjustment threnody. Sex can only carry 2 people so far, Rachel said. Then they should begin using their cerebral aptitude and not merely to protest the SNL bailout or the Exxon Valdez oil spill. Your so-called brain is still crawling through the muck of the Precambrian, and it can't even breathe oxygen yet. Get out of here. Stop clinging to me. I can't stand your irrational cupidity. I don't understand what you're saying, I cried bitterly from the driveway. You call yourself a journalist, but you can't even handle words correctly. Tough titty, she'd already slammed the door behind me. Jump cut another 4 years to 1992. Why did I buy a new house? Because I'd lost my former digs and an acre of irrigated land to Rachel in our divorce. Then the landlady at my 2-room rental apartment gave me the old heave-ho because I'd rejected her amorous advances, a convoluted bummer that I prefer not to amplify here. You mightn't believe this, but of late I'd gone celibate hoping to somehow entice Rachel back for more. I'm not sure how to explain this implausible behavior. A harebrained measure, I know. What sort of tortured reasoning concludes that chastity equals seduction? Perhaps we'd clashed with each other like two vandal warriors brandishing broadswords and spiked iron maces attached to the end of chains. Yet our perpetual bewildering contretemps had imbued me with a sexual delirium and emotional codependency that I know somewhere is defined as anarchical burning love. And I could not quit myself of it. To be sure, the story of our big arsenic fishing contest bears no relationship to such a tyrannical obsession, hence I won't dwell on it. Nevertheless, I found it impossible to whitewash Rachel from my mind. She was my Donnybrook, my Battle of the Bulge, my Dresden firestorm. I clumped about in a broody mode, whistling melancholy dirges. Almost every weekend, I casually drove by my old house, longing to catch a glimpse of her out in the yard, watering a hollyhock, or perhaps in just her bra and panties, hanging freshly laundered sheets upon the line. If by chance we happened to meet at the post office, I smiled at her, sickly no doubt, and Rachel nodded at me coolly as we chatted about the weather and whatnot. That woman possessed demonic restraint, fiendish indifference. For 1, 2, 3 years she had allowed absolutely no connection to pass between us. Who knows how she accomplished that? I myself ached for her so badly I'm surprised I did not suddenly haul off and whack her with the right uppercut in front of Uncle Sam's postal clerks and all their patrons. My older daughter Stephanie said, "Give it up, old man. You're running in place. You'll never win the race." My younger daughter Naomi said, "Pop, you should go to a proctologist and have your head examined." My girls think they're funny. It's a genetic blemish inherited from guess who? Their mother, Gretchen, wisely withheld comment on my situation. There was no need for her to verbally dig my grave since I could accomplish that very well myself. Gretchen and I maintain a distant but civil relationship, all for the sake of our girls. Anyway, enough already. I purchased the cheap shack and that required all my savings left after the divorce and put me in dreadful debt. Rachel, the once radical journalist, come special ed teacher, come museum diorama artist, had now become a successful local therapist and drug counselor, raking in the shekels hand over fist. Misery loves clinical sympathy. Understand, I'm not hollering foul play. You can't blame your life on anyone else. As soon as Rachel swiftly earned a master's in social work, she obtained certification and licenses in family and addiction counseling, then aced all the relevant national and state exams, whereupon bipolar heroin addicts and suicidal mortgage brokers began knocking down her door for help. She also led popular group sections for adult children of alcoholics. The local grapevine informed me that Rachel excelled at marriage counseling, anger management, child abuse, battered women, and transformational guidance, whatever that is. She was on the board of Community Against Violence, aiding a wide range of disparate personalities who were dearly helped by her insightful empathy and wisdom. Strange as it seems, my second ex had a real gift. Now, how could I compete with that? Not for ages had I spotted Rachel around town with another guy. This fact sort of gave me hope. Could she be suffering too? On one occasion, I bumped into her at Smith's, accompanied by a bearded young stud pushing her shopping cart. But he turned out to be her youngest gill netting son from Alaska, named Willard. When Willard shook my hand, he almost broke every bone in it. Her other son, Maynard, was doing time in a court of a jail for firing an AR-15 at a rival salmon boat, infringing on his territory. Both lads were a couple of hotheads like their mom. Me, years later, I had celebrated my 56th birthday 2 months earlier, at the end of July, and I could display a scar from my throat to my belly button to prove it. Don't ask, I'll tell. Although this is embarrassing, I may as well fess up. I had already been remarried and re-divorced for the third time in my life since our 1992 Big Arsenic Fishing Contest. Sounds loopy? It's true. Who did I marry? 3 guesses. The first 2 don't count. That's right. Rachel and I were drawn back together like Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, like Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo, like the Dodgers and the cursed Yankees long ago during their 1950s World Series clashes. Suddenly, she and I had collided again, and we couldn't keep our mitts off of each other. It started this way. I phoned her office to make an appointment for counseling. She asked, "What's the problem?" I said, "I'm depressed, I can't get motivated, I'm lethargic, I'm drinking too much, I'm in a tailspin, I need help." "You and everyone else," she retorted coldly. "See a shrink, get some Prozac." "I need help from you," I wheedled. Rachel harumphed. "You're out of your mind, I'm a professional, I'm wise to you." I pleaded, "But you're the only person who understands me." "Yes, unfortunately, that's true," she agreed. "And for that reason, I wouldn't touch you in my office with a 10-foot pole." I assured her, "I won't break any of your precious client-therapist rules." She pointed out, "The fact that we're even having this phone conversation is compromising my client-therapist rules." Then who knows why, her demons, my demons, ghastly serendipity, but she made an appointment with me. We had not spoken intimately for several years. Yet 5 minutes into our session, we began groping each other against her desk. And 20 minutes later, we finished our unexpected collision in a noisy clatter of rapturous exclamations while grappling on the office shag rug, thus breaking all her rules. "You son of a bitch," she hissed. "I've missed you terribly," I gasped. "You don't deserve me," she snarled. "I can't live without you," I groaned. "Okay," Rachel said, abruptly as calm as the eye of a hurricane. "But I don't want to live together. You crowd me and you're out. I need my own space." "Me too," I echoed euphorically, proving that human emotional complexities and libidos are unfathomable. Question: how can it be that I'd mysteriously cajoled what I wanted from this upscale, morally committed, rational, responsible, respectable, and even-keeled feminist icon? Answer: you can never tell a person by their public persona. A week later, we completed our blood test, purchased the marriage certificate, and said "I do" before a magistrate judge. It was just her, me, the judge, and his doddering secretary who'd been with him for 3 decades. We had conscripted 2 witnesses from the lobby, the chubby guard who checked everybody through a metal detector, and an off-duty cop waiting to bail out his ex-son-in-law jailed for failure to pay 8 months of back child support. Rachel had dressed up for the occasion in jogger, Nikes, and ankle socks, aluminum-colored exercise shorts, and a T-shirt with the Smokey Bear logo. We planned to go running afterward. The judge said, "Ma'am, could you please remove your gum?" Rachel had woven her blonde hair into a long braid, and she had a good tan. I could picture her as one of the players on America's World Cup women's soccer team, healthy, athletic, and with the sharply alert eyes of a peregrine falcon. You had to really keep a close watch on Rachel to surprise her looking drowsy, usually only around the time of her period, which was ending with menopause or after sex. Otherwise, she appeared 10 years younger and ferociously alive and arresting, like a maid who could have passed for Joan of Arc centuries ago. Intimidating, regal, sensual, and somewhere in there, part of her great seductive charm, alluringly childlike. Shirley Temple meets Jacqueline Bisset. Rachel was always catching me off guard, and that being part of her personality gimmick. I never knew when we woke up together if she'd nestle snugly against me needing sex, or hop out of bed, grab a cup of coffee and a glazed donut and be out of the kitchen door before I even realized that her foot had hit the floor. Over the next 3 years, our frenzied intellectual broadening led to emotional exhaustion, extreme jealousy, finally preordained betrayal, and down we twirled again, spectacularly in flames. During that hysterical epic, I almost died of endocarditis. Then I segued into congestive heart failure, suffered open heart surgery. They stitched an annuloplasty ring to my mitral valve. And next, for good measure, I underwent a double hernia operation and got divorced once more. Never again, Rachel and I pledged in unison to each other as the divorce papers were being signed. And we sealed our vows with a final spasm of carnal excess. At least this time around, no houses and very little money changed hands. My older daughter, Stephanie, now happily married and the mother of a comely infant, Callie, studied her wristwatch and predicted, I bet you two start screwing each other again in 2 years, 7 months, 16 days, 5 hours, and 32 minutes. My younger daughter, Naomi, now a college pre-med student aiming to be a pediatrician, said, dollars to donuts, Pop, that your relationship with Rachel is just beginning. What is it with you and women? My friend Yuri asked. I'm hopelessly in love with her, I protested. You know that. I can't erase her off my mind. I'm obsessed by her imagination, her emotional fervor, her energy, her intellectual dexterity. The sex with her is like a wonderful car crash that never ends. The vehicle just rolls over and over down a... What can she possibly see in you? My other friend Bubba interrupted. I'm a respectable writer, I said. I have an uproarious sense of humor. Politically, I support all the right causes, both environmental and social. I love the outdoors, the alpine ridgetop, the Rio Grande Gorge, our high desert sagebrush mesas. I love movies and literature. I listen to Amy Goodman on NPR. At home, I do dishes and vacuum carpets. I take the laundry to Peralta's. I fix the roof and prune the apple tree. I'm civil to her boys when they come to visit us from Alaska and pass endless boring days chewing the rag about seals robbing sockeye from their gill nets while Indian fishing rights are keel hauling their vocations. I don't eat too much. I keep in shape. And in bed, I'm like an indefatigable conjugal warrior who's not afraid to manifest his feminine side. And furthermore, Jesus, you're a lost cause, Yuri said. An emotionally arrested person just like your literature, the epitome of gauche. When will you learn that infatuation is not intimacy even if it lasts for a decade? You have to travel beyond the need for perpetual thrill. You must calm down and prepare for the long haul. Love is not a 100-yard dash, it's a marathon. Relationships are hard work. Sex is not all it's cracked up to be. Read Portnoy's Complaint, or maybe even take the plunge and plow through Anna Karenina. It wouldn't hurt you to open a Flaubert tome either. Or maybe sink your teeth into Hedda Gabler or Jane Austen. Women are way more than Dolly Parton and Jane Mansfield. Did you ever read Strindberg or the Kreutzer Sonata? You might even approach a novel by Edith Wharton or take a break from the paucity of your intellectual range and crack a tract by Hegel. Try some of his dialectical laws on for size, then push on to Hegel's and Marx with their materialistic view of history, which you claim to espouse even though you've never read Das Kapital or The Origin of the Family, Private Property in the State. Bottom line, you are a shallow dilettante, an amateur Lothario. You even write pop fiction like a dilettante with little or no emotional depth. You describe the surface of things with a fancy schmancy vocabulary, but you never investigate underneath. I pity your offspring, their genetic roots. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me, he replied. I'm only a third-rate adjunct professor in the University of Relationship Advice.
There's a reason that he's a Taos legend. Yeah. I've got an idea that anybody who comes into town should be presented with the complete works of John Nichols, and they have to read them before they can be one. So again, this is for Shared Table, and Steve Wired, one of the rules of Misfits, Malcontents, and Mystics is that whatever the nonprofit that's being benefited, that the director or whoever's in charge of it has to read. So that's Steve tonight. And Steve, sure, he does the Shared Table. He also, if you don't know, was the president of the Men's Shelter Board for a long time, which is where I got to know him. But what I will always remember Steve Wired for, more than anything, is when I was going through my divorce and I was completely broken. And Steve said, why don't you just come by the church one day and just we'll talk. And I went and I spoke to him, and I was broken. I was really down. And I said, Steve, I don't know what to do. Very simply, he just said, Clint, he said, can we just pray right here for a minute? And I'm a spiritual man. And I said, yeah. And it was one of the key things that helped me get through that time. It was amazing. It was beautiful. And so for that, I will always thank Steve Wired.
Thank you, Clint. I must say it's not easy following a Taos legend, but I shall do my best. And I simply want to say on behalf of our whole team at the Shared Table in El Poblito that I just thank you all for your support of what we do to try to help others in the community, those who are on the margins, and there's several reasons they're there, but we don't judge, we just try to help, so I thank you. My story tonight is simply called Steve's Story. We all have our own, and this is a part of mine, coming to Taos. Do you remember what it was like when you first fell in love? It was that kind of feeling for me when I came to Taos for a visit in September of 1995. The air, the art, the coffee, the people I met, it all seemed to come together in a way that touched my spirit, my heart, my very being. And so, as one pursues a lover, I began making plans to find a way to get to Taos. I remember what it was like to walk across a big empty room in junior high and gather the courage to ask a girl if she'd like to dance. I don't claim to know what that experience is like for a girl, but I know what it's like for a 13-year-old boy. And I learned not to give up on whatever I wanted in life. And so it was with coming to Taos. I was in my late 40s, just after a divorce, ending 23 years of marriage, losing an election in Kansas, and 2 kids who were now on their own. I was ready for a move. In June of 1997, I arrived in Taos with a U-Haul pulling my Jeep. A friend said he would bring my horse to Taos later in the summer. I took a pay cut, but I had a job serving a little Methodist church. And oh yes, I was told that there was a small food pantry I would direct called Shared Table. The first week I came to work, I met volunteers in the kitchen. I introduced myself as the new pastor, and one of the volunteers who lived on the mesa shook my hand and said, "Folks just call me Pork Chop." And from that moment on, I knew I was no longer in Kansas. And what began in 1994 by a small but dedicated group of El Pueblito folk as a dream to provide food and help and give a hand up to those on the margins of our community has now grown into an organization that provides food commodities, basic health care essentials, and school supplies to over 1,000 people a month all year long. And 1/3 of those are children. Twice a month, all year long, we distribute on both ends of Taos, helping those in need. A small staff and a cadre of volunteers and donors make up our team. We distribute frozen meat, potatoes, fruit, vegetables, dairy products, and bread, as well as soap and shampoo, toothbrushes, toilet paper, tampons, diapers, and condoms. And we try to put the Pampers right beside the condoms so they'll make the connection. And about every 2 months, I go to the public health clinic across from the hospital to replenish our supply of condoms. And they provide small paper bags there for most clients to put 5 or maybe 10 condoms in at a time if they wish. When the staff sees me walk in, however, they bring a big plastic bag and a carton of condoms, and I proceed to fill up the whole bag while people in the waiting room just stare in amazement and wonder. And I nod politely to them and make my exit. While someone invariably asks, "Who is that man?" "Oh, that's Steve Wired, the Methodist preacher," the staff answers. True story. On a more serious note, I had been in Taos about a year when there was a homicide at the Gorge Bridge. A couple of guys beat up a young man, stole his car, robbed him, and threw him off the bridge. Nancy Stapp was on the radio at that time, filtering the community's grief. I called in and we talked about what we could do to help. As a result of our discussion, I decided to have a memorial service out at the bridge on the west side for family and friends of the young man, whose name was Eric. Nearly 200 people showed up. He was from the Espanola area, and we had many lowriders at the bridge that day. It's the same place where we have an Easter sunrise service every year. Rain, snow, or sunshine, doesn't matter. We gather at that sacred place to remember the lives that have been lost and to renew the spirits of those who have come. Let me share a Christmas Eve story with you that happened 16 or 17 years ago at El Pueblito. I was getting ready for Christmas Eve communion service when an old car pulled up in front of the church. I remember it well. It was snowing heavily that night, and a couple knocked on the door and asked if we had any food, for they were hungry. I got them some food from the pantry, and then the man asked if we had any bread. I replied that we did not have any bread. But as soon as I uttered those words, I turned to a guy who was helping me that night, Jack Netto. Some of you may remember Jack. I said, "Jack, we do have some bread. The communion bread that's on the altar." So I went to the altar, I broke the loaf in half, and gave the couple some bread. The rest of the story is that they had a small baby with them. I never saw them again. I never got their names. But it was as close to a visit from Joseph, Mary, and Jesus as I have ever come. And I get chills to this day telling this story of a poor couple with a baby coming to the church where Shared Table is on a snowy Christmas Eve asking for food. I know God's busy, but sometimes God's right on time, and she continues to bless me and surprise me. At El Poblito, we also do church outdoors the last Sunday of June, July, and August, out behind the church on the north side. It all started the first summer I was here. I brought my horse to church and preached from horseback. I put an ad in the Taos News and invited curious atheists and friendly agnostics to come hear a Sermon on the Mount. That's true. And the work goes on. And so do the things that have caused me to grow and change over these past 19 years. I met a woman here named Eileen who moved to Taos from Boston in the summer of 2002. We dated a little over 5 years. And finally she said, "I don't know if I can make it here by myself any longer. I may look for a job in New York City." "New York City," I said. Yep, it was time. It was actually past time to pose the question. And to my good fortune, she said yes. The friends I've made here, the travel opportunities that I've said yes to, Kansas did not send such people or adventures my way, but Taos surely has. And for those friends and passport stamps, I will be forever grateful. I'm continually humbled and challenged to serve a small church by the side of the road that attempts to practice progressive Christianity with an emphasis on inclusive social justice. The rubber meets the road at El Poblito with Shared Table. There's not much red tape to get through. And whether it's the Easter sunrise service at the Gorge Bridge or giving crayons and school supplies in line to young kids at Shared Table, it's all about service and doing a little good. In spite of the poverty and the multiple addictions I see and the late-night phone calls I receive from so many in need, I love Taos and the work I do. My friends help me keep a necessary balance and some perspective as we share beer, margaritas, and conversation. Some call that pub theology. I just call it hanging out with friends in Taos. And I thank you for helping me become the man I am today at this stage of my life. And you know you're always welcome at El Poblito and Shared Table. Blessings and blue skies.
We're going to take a break for intermission now. There's a secret about Misfits, Malcontents, and Mystics. It's $10 for 2 hours of entertainment, and I think it's a pretty good bargain. I do that so that everybody can come. If you're feeling moved by this, if you feel like $10 is just not enough, there's a donation table for Shared Table out there. And even if you don't have anything to donate, just stop by and talk to them. They've got a ton of information. Mingle with them, see what's up, and then we'll come back and have 4 more readers. Thanks. Welcome back. So I'm really excited about our next reader. Danielle Rose is one of those people who's just kind of a dynamo. And when we began this, she approached me and she said, "Would you like to videotape this?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." It turns out she's a professional videographer. I know her through yoga. She's one of my yoga students. And every once in a while you meet someone who's such a kindred spirit, and you can just kind of see into their soul, and it's like, oh, wow, that person's been there. She's one of those people. Danielle Rose.
Okay, there we go. So I want to start by dedicating my version of tonight to Heather and Brendan, who have just been through a whole lot. And if you get a minute later, just quiet your heart down a little and send them some love. And while you're at it, go ahead and send it out to the world. Even the wicked things that are like really hard to love, like try to give it just a second, because they really need it right now. Have you ever heard the cry of a mother whose child was ripped away too soon? I have. From the cavern of my lungs, an instance, one instant between life and death. My Taos story, like many of them, is a bit odd, a bit painful, and a bit beautiful. It begins 8 years ago, sitting around a campfire in Pennsylvania, full of LSD and ketamine, and a mystical man telling stories in Russian. I had no idea what he was saying, but it didn't matter because I was captivated. The next day, I was told he was telling stories about his deaths in the Peruvian jungle, the ego death, and the sacred ayahuasca dieta. A few months later, we found ourselves sitting in a ceremony with a shaman in New York City, and it changed everything. In the sacred Icaros of the shaman, I heard the messages to leave New York City, the sinking east, and head to the land of canyons and the red earth, the Southwest. The next day, I told my husband the messages that I had heard, and a few weeks later, we stopped paying our rent, bought a Volvo 240 wagon, ditched 90% of our belongings, and moved to Los Angeles. We worked in the film industry, so this seemed more logical than the Southwest. California never quite worked for us, no matter how much we worked it. But on a traveling television show, we found ourselves in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and felt something calling us. In the spring of 2011, we decided to move to New Mexico. We'd heard rumors of a great film industry. So we found a place on Craigslist outside of Santa Fe, and full of excitement and anticipation, we drove our Volvo 240 to our new home in Espanola. We had never seen the place, and I was from the East Coast, where a small house by the river 25 minutes away from the city meant a suburb, or the country. We got Espanola. All in all, it was a fine place in a farming neighborhood by the river. We were lucky. New Mexico welcomed us. We found work immediately, and generally, things moved much faster than they ever had before. By the end of the year, I found out I was pregnant. My pregnancy was amazing. I'm a person that really likes or enjoys the experiencing of life, even when it's odd or uncomfortable, just experiencing it. And pregnancy was fascinating. I knew that I wanted a natural birth, so I came to find the Northern New Mexico Birth Center in Taos, New Mexico. Our baby was due on May 13th, 2012, Mother's Day. And like most babies, that day came and went with no sign of labor. The baby comes when the baby is ready is the mantra of the overdue mother. That year, there was also a solar eclipse on May 20th. And I have to admit, I romanticized the idea of an eclipse baby. We drove from Espanola to Taos to watch it at that rest area where you come out of the canyon and the earth splits wide open and you can't find your breath just for a moment. I watched the eclipse and daydreamed about how this story was going to unfold. The baby didn't come that day, and after a week, they started taking precautions. I started going to the hospital every second day to make sure things were okay, and they were. On the morning of May 24th, I started having contractions and woke up with a strange discharge. The midwife said it was time to make the drive up to Taos and to plan to stay. We drove up to the birth center, and they immediately checked on the baby. His heart rate was slow, but when they shifted me around, it quickly recovered, and I was told to go get breakfast as I would need my energy and come back in an hour. We spent that hour sitting at the John Dunshop benches, thinking of how fast our lives were about to change. When we returned to the birth center, it was time for another checkup. This time, the baby's heart rate was barely noticeable, and we needed to go to the hospital immediately. I don't think I had any comprehension of what was really happening. I figured I might need a C-section, and that would be okay. But the nurses and midwives were rushing me along. Check-in, hospital gown, ultrasound, no heartbeat. What? No heartbeat. Dead. My doctor wanted to try to save the baby, and in total disbelief about what was happening, I agreed and started to cry. Dr. Shanti gripped my leg tight and said, "I need you to be strong now." I swallowed my tears, but I could not stop them from flowing as they hurried me onto a bed and into the operating room. Everything happened so fast. When I woke up, it was like a movie. Bright lights and a circle of faces. One of them was my husband's. I asked him if everything was okay, still believing the answer had to be yes, but he shook his head. "No," he said, "but we aren't given things in life that we can't handle." I screamed at the news and cried as my body started shaking. I was freezing cold. There are moments when in an instant you know your life will never be the same again. Later that day, heavily sedated, the nurse asked me if I wanted to see my baby. I was so surprised that this was even an option. I held my beautiful boy in my arms, examining him, not really sure what to do. Looking back on it, I wish I had not had the C-section. The anesthesia and drugs made it very hard to be fully present with what was happening. Sometimes I wish I had birthed him naturally so I could have fully connected with my child and what was happening. But that's not really fair of me. I don't have any idea what it's like to birth a stillborn naturally, any more than those mothers know what my experience was like, any more than anyone understands what it's like the moment you hear your child is dead. Dead. Before I ever had a chance to say hello or I love you. Death is so finite. It's what I struggled with the most. There was absolutely nothing I could do to change this. There was absolutely nothing I could do to change this. I spent weeks rolling around in this realization, checking every ounce of my being for a way out of this, for a take back. But there was no take back, no way out of the grief. I had a hole in my body where my baby was taken and never returned, and I felt robbed. I will never forget the last time I held him. At the funeral home after I was released from the hospital, I asked to see him one last time. He was freezing cold. I will never forget that moment. I was coherent, free from tubes and monitors, and strong enough to stand. I held him. I held him the way I wished I would hold him over and over and over. And I cried, and I said goodbye. It never made sense to me saying goodbye to a dead body, and still I said goodbye to my expectations, to my dreams. This one was the hardest moment of my life so far. I'd like to say that part of me died that day, but I can't. I'm not really sure what happened, but it's possible something inside of me was born. There is a strange paradox of saying goodbye to someone who never was, whom you loved, whom you held and saw, but never breathed a breath of air. I began to question the lines between truth and fiction. After all, there's no true reality other than now. So in a way, it made my child a void, a black hole, a something that was nothing or a nothing that was something. I started to ask, what is life exactly? What is real? It's something I've actually thought about since childhood. Today, how is Abraham Lincoln any more real than Holden Caulfield? They're both just stories. Neither of them really exist today. And one of them had more life inside of me than the other. It wasn't the president. So there seems to be this other dimension, this transcendental realm where the intangible things express life through us, through our being. And we get to decide, how will this be expressed in my life, the reality? How can this live through me, and what will that life look like? Will it be ugly or honorable? Will it destroy me or make me better? I chose the second to honor my child, to honor this soul that came to me in the most intimate of ways to teach me, to change me. My heart was broken open wide. I became the broken, open-hearted warrior. I learned the strength that comes in vulnerability and the power of love. I want the world to know that my first child changed my life profoundly and that I am a better person for it, for his being, just as it was. My husband and I survived this time by being in the nature of northern New Mexico. I was walking and hiking within a few days of my surgery, and we found ourselves driving to and through Taos on a daily basis. In August of 2012, we moved to Taos. Our baby had brought us home. I still think of him as I drive out of the canyon and the earth splits wide open, and you can't find your breath, just for a moment. One day, I will put his ashes there. There are many parts of this story I still don't quite understand, parts I can't quite explain, like how your husband will never look at you the same when he blames you for the death of his son, or how you will mother your second child, a beautiful little boy, and pray on the daily, please don't take him from me. For me, Taos has been a place of huge loss, but also of beautiful discovery, of rediscovering the sacred and embarking on the profound journey of rediscovering myself. Thank you.
We promise you laughter and we promise you tears. Last year I turned 40 and I had a birthday party, and I only wanted about 10 people there, and these were people who were very close to me. And one of the people that I asked to be there was my friend Trey DaCosta, who's up next. Trey's an interesting fellow. When I met him, one of the first things he told me was this story about how he had traveled to, now I don't know if I'm going to get this right, but Indonesia or some such remote area, and immersed himself with this tribe in order to become tattooed by them. And I thought, now here's a guy worth knowing. I hope you'll think so too. Trey DaCosta.
Okay, guys, here we go. So first, I'd like to thank Clint for putting this together tonight. Really an amazing event, amazing group of people, and just like to give Clint a round of applause for championing the nonprofits the way he does. So first of all, I'd like to start, my lovely wife and I moved to Taos a little over 5 years ago. Our plan was to open a restaurant, and any of you that know my wife, Lizzie, can completely understand the old saying, behind every great man is an even greater woman running the show. Well, we are the perfect example of that. Well, I obviously hold down the beauty side of the relationship. My wife is all business, trust me. She always has been the glorious distractions to my epic malfunctions. So I owe her everything, and a lot of gratitude to my wife. And I'm in awe of her on a daily basis with her powers that she shows in front of me and in front of my friends and family. I wish everyone here the gift of knowing your perfect partner, because I certainly know mine. So yeah, we came here to open a restaurant. Thank you very much. We came here to open a restaurant. We cook, we pour wine, we throw parties. That's what we do. That's what we love to do. But Taos had other plans for us. So as we were open to anything this town had to offer, we eventually ended up owning a cool little tattoo shop in Taos and a gallery in our historic home on Kit Carson, which is all pretty amazing stuff. Liz and I moved to Ralph and Rowena Meyer's home about 4 years ago. The home is over 200 years old and is still owned by one of Ralph's grandsons. The home is a character all to itself. We sit under this historic portal every morning and have our coffee and our first smoke of the day. I always catch myself wondering, before this monolithic Cabot Plaza was built in the early 1900s, Ralph had the perfect view from this front porch. I try to imagine that beautiful scene atop the hill of Kit Carson Road, rolling down the plaza with the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in the background, he must have felt like a mystical shepherd keeping an eye on his malcontent flock. Seriously, must have been one of the best porches in town. For those of you who do not know Ralph Myers or who Ralph Myers is or was, well, he is and was one of the first misfits, malcontents, and mystics of Taos. Most people recognize his name through the generic tourist brochures and unresearched online drivel as the first white man to trade with the Taos Pueblo. Well, Ralph was that, but he was also so much more. Ralph was a champion of native rights, was a strong voice for the people of the Pueblo. His full name was Ralph Waldo Emerson Myers, which I find a little ironic considering Ralph's life played out more like a Shakespearean tragedy than an Emerson essay. He was also the father of our beloved local Ure Myers, who sadly has recently passed on, a great painter in his own right. Ralph spent his youth in Denver and moved to Taos in 1908 to stake his claim, so to speak. Not only did he stake his claim, he staked his destiny in Taos. Not sure how many of you are aware the influence that Ralph had in northern New Mexico, but Ralph Myers is, in my opinion, without a doubt, one of the most prolific painters, collectors, silversmiths, and furniture craftsmen in New Mexico. He is the main source of the Spanish colonial furniture designs that Taos has become so famous for. Out of all of Ralph's artistic talents and everything he could have described himself as, he chose to identify himself as a painter. He held the Taos masters in high regard, wasn't one, but wished he was. He learned from the masters here, watched them work, sold them art supplies out of his trading post, and built their studios. Always kept on the perimeter, but never allowed in the circle. See, Ralph only had a third grade education. Again, a true misfit. How could he ever compare or compete with highly educated international fine art masters? Well, simply stated, he couldn't, and he was tortured by it. As his work progressed, his painting skills became undeniable. He was noticed and accepted by the masters as an excellent amateur painter, one of the best colorists in Taos, and even allowed to show with the society on some occasions. His standards for oil on canvas works were obviously at the top level of artistic perfection, scrumming and gnashing his paint to the canvas, always with Sharp, Coos, Blumenschein, and Phillips in his mind's eye. It's no wonder why he always was disappointed with his results. As with most impassioned artists, Ralph had his demons. He loved rye whiskey and socializing with his friends into the wee hours in Taos. So much so that he eventually chose his drink over his lovely young wife, Rowena. One of the most notable misfit stories about Ralph is in the later part of his life, he was painting on a daily basis. He had finished an entire bottle of whiskey and in a drunken rage started a fire in the middle of Kit Carson Road. And in that fire, literally burned every single painting he had ever created. I just spoke with one of his grandsons this morning, and just to get an exact number on what how many paintings he burned that day, I think the number was up around 20. Ralph's paintings retail in the open art market these days for roughly $15,000 to $25,000 a piece. So as you add that up as a businessman, that is almost $500,000 worth of amazing art up in smoke that night. More devastating than the money, every sunset, every sky, every mountain, every native on horseback, every hollyhock, and every blade of grass that Ralph had painted so far, gone in that whiskey-fueled fire and carried away on the smoke of regret. His wife, Rowena, would never speak to him again. If that's not total punk rock misfit behavior, I don't know what is. I admire and am in awe of his anger, his suffering, dedication towards his art. It mattered to him. He burned them all because he simply thought they were not good enough, unviewable, better not to exist than to be seen as imperfect through his own eyes. As Ralph was a voice for the voiceless, I would like to be that voice for Ralph. I believe history has overlooked him. I believe that in a lot of ways, Taos has overlooked him. And I believe the art historians have definitely looked past his brilliance, possibly because he was a true drunken misfit, a malcontent at the highest level. And when it came to painting, blessing his canvas with his brush as a mystic would bless the heavens above. Ralph Myers is a true Taos icon, a man that I'm proud to follow in his footsteps, Proud to sell art out of his studio, walk the same paths he did, sleep under the roofs he built, walk the floors he laid, and make our daily fireplaces in the fireplaces he handcrafted. And actually put my own oil to canvas in his sacred space, which, by the way, I do still share with him. Oh yes, Ralph's spirit is heavy and present in the house we share with him and other voices from the past. I'm sure everyone here has their opinion on residual energy, spirits, and ghosts of the past. Well, I'm here to tell you, in this town, the spirits are restless and still roam. The spirits want to witness and contribute. Their blood has made the grass grow here, and these spirits are the very soul of Taos. Ralph was always a voice for those with no voice in town. He gave, taught, donated, fed, and clothed anyone that needed it. He spoke for those misfits that could not speak for themselves. He wanted justice for those that had been forgotten, at least justice in the eyes of history. Ralph went as far as to design and draw a very detailed map of all the unjust hangings and executions that took place around the plaza after the Native uprisings. As far as I know, there is no other map in history that exists with this information. He's identified every tree that an innocent revolutionary Teseño gave their last minutes hanging from. I believe the strength and braveness of these rebellious locals and the reservoir from which these towering oaks and pines in the plaza drink from. Their roots have tasted this blood, but prefer the nourishment of the cold, flowing truth. These men were not criminals. They were free men. They were Teseños. The spirits of these men, women, and children are here and still share this town with us. I believe Ralph is still acting as the voice for these indigenous heroes. Ralph Meyer's final resting place is not even a stone's throw away from this very stage. He is spending eternity next to his best friend, Mabel Dodge Lujan. Ralph's grave is marked by a very old and mysterious stone decorated with ancient carvings. No one knows where the stone came from or who put it there. I choose to see it as a gift from the mountain and the people he cherished and loved. This town has a way of defining your path, identifying your place, showing your true direction. It will pull the worst from you, and it will pull the best from you. We all know the tragic stories. We've all seen Taos spit them out one after another. Those of us blessed to be accepted and consumed by these specific geographical coordinates have a responsibility to live true and free. I personally believe that is our offering. That is what is asked of all of us here tonight, is to live true and free. Thanks.
I think we have our next image for the next poster for Misfits, Malcontents, and Mystics. Hannah Wesley's a little bit of an enigma. She arrived in Taos, I don't know, maybe a little more than a year ago. And I got to know her because she's a barista at the World Cup, a place that I frequent. As I got to know her, she kind of began to unfold a little bit. And the more that I came to know about Hannah, the more similar I came to see that we were. Turns out we're from the same place, with the same state in Oregon. One day she was playing my favorite band, which is The Replacements, which is an obscure band, and I was surprised by that. And then I found out she's a writer. So I knew that she had to read tonight here at Misfits, Malcontents, and Mystics. Hannah Wesley.
Georgia O'Keeffe once said of the New Mexico landscape that at first glance it seems as if it has already been painted for you. But that was before, she says, she attempted to paint it. And so it is that after many attempts to record this story, I find myself writing it 3 years later. This is the story. Every day after work, Professor Asher leaves campus by the back road. The road is narrow and thickly forested. After a few minutes of driving, he arrives at a T in the road. Because the road he meets is likewise windy and thickly forested, He can only see about 30 feet in each direction as he sits at the stop sign. Or to put it in more literal terms, a car coming around the bend in either direction can only be seen for about 3 seconds before it passes in front of him. Each day, he comes to the stop sign, and without a car in sight, he waits, as if waiting for a car to come. That is the whole story. The epilogue is, of course, that he eventually does turn onto the road and returns to his home, his wife, and child. When I first heard this story, I was deeply excited by that idea, that strange and profound moment of waiting. I've imagined it so many times that it almost feels like my own memory. I see the road, dark and slick with rain. I watch the yellow line and enjoy the lilting sweep of the car along the curves of the hill like a train on its tracks. I reach the bottom of the hill, excited and a little breathless. As I slow down, the greenness outside slows too, and together we come to a halt. The youngest fronds of the fern curl tight to the base. The boughs of the pine droop low. I roll down the window just a little. Whether to listen or proclaim, I cannot say, but my head and chest swell with it. After a moment, disappointment, shame, and confusion creep upon me, and it is only once I am on the highway that I find myself exhaling. It is almost my own memory. I spent a long time trying to find a parallel story in my own life, and I could not find the answers to the questions it posed. Mainly, what does it mean to wait, to take a position of waiting? What are we doing when we wait for something that is by its very nature unexpected? Every day, on the bench outside the coffee shop where I work, an oscillating dozen watch cars come and go. Together, they greet, they bicker, they comfort, they forget, they interrupt and distract one another. And as they wait for all these things, I wait upon them. Oftentimes, they stay too long, and with a defiant sigh, they unfurl in a stretch, cast off empty cups, and flap away, dazed and perhaps a little melancholic. I love them, and I think they are brave and also sweet. Not everyone feels this way. Oftentimes, certain customers express to me a desire to hold these birds on a wire accountable for their idleness. Not surprisingly, these vigilante arbiters never want to know what they talk of, what they're doing there. What they really want to hear is what they think they already know, what the birds aren't doing, what they are neglecting to do. To them, stories about waiting are always cover stories for avoidance, fear, and the worst and most banal parts of human existence. They might say the professor waits at the stop sign to avoid an unbearable home life, or because he fears a fantastic crash. Here is a secret I will only say once. Those people may not be wrong, but they are no friend to the lost or the waiting. And their miserly hearts are thinly veiled in an unimaginative ambition. Let us choose not to deal in such heavy-handed accuracies. Tonight, every night, let us tell a lie we prefer to the truth. To notice our waiting is to touch the air we live in. Its closeness, not its strangeness, conceals it. One of the most striking ways we wait is the way we wait on desire. When we wait with desire, we imagine the object of that desire. But first, we wait for the desire to locate such an object. Just like before we look for someone to talk to, we wait for the desire to speak. When we fall in love, or don't, we make a choice between desiring and waiting. We often hear college graduates talk about feeling lost. Waiting is the way in which we choose to be lost. I love the car allegory because it transforms the white noise of waiting into a moment of breathless excitement, followed by the sudden vertigo of freedom. It's how I feel when I stand out on the mesa. It's how I've felt at every moment of my life that's ever made me happy. In the 2 years since I graduated college, I have come to believe in this opaque allegory. I believe that it holds the secret to navigating my post-grad life. In staying with the story, I mirror it. I, too, am waiting for an unforeseeable burst of knowledge that will, more than anything, prevent me from the clear, uninspired path ahead. Waiting to discover that things are not as they are, that things are unforeseeably different, has its dangers. Boredom, depression, loneliness. These are the woods of waiting, dark and deep. When we are lost in them, their impression of permanence is profound. If waiting is the way in which we choose to be lost, then these woods are the way of being lost that we cannot imagine how to unchoose. Truth be told, in all my waiting, I have spent more time in the woods than out. I have followed maps to nowhere, and waited for things that never came, or that came but left. Waiting, it turns out, depends less on our patience than it does on our relationship to reality. Those who wait have a quarrel with the world. In the opposite of distraction, I watch lunatics and obsessive waltz by, and I envy their direction, their sense of the coordinates. Whether in the woods or on the mesa, I want and I try to believe that the things I wait for wait for me just as much. I'm still in Taos. If you see me at a stop sign, I'll be waiting. Or you may see me on the road tonight, driving fast.
Beautiful. One of the ideas behind Misfits, Malcontents, and Mystics here is that we're building community. So I hope that if you're touched by one of these readers' stories, and if you see them out in our town, connect with them, say hi. That's part of what this is. Our final reader for this evening, and I always butcher his name, and I apologize, Ned, but it's Ned Doherty. I try to get it right. So this thing, Misfits, Malcontents, and Mystics, it really sprang out of something called Lit Up Writers, which is something that Ned and I were both a part of. And the 2 times that it happened here in Taos at the Meta Theater, both times I watched Ned, I was so floored. I just thought, please don't let me have to read after him. He most recently wrote a play called Escape Plans. It was great. He's been named Teacher of the Year, and he's finally agreed to read for us here tonight, our last reader, Ned Doherty.
Thanks for sticking around. It's always cheesy to say this, but give yourselves a round of applause for raising so much money for the shared table and what Steve has done for our community. This one. Better? How's that? Cool. I'm worried about Robin, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about the 3 times that I cried in college. And in order to do so, we have to go back to middle school. And in middle school, I remember making a bet with my father that he didn't think that I could stay sober through the 4 years of high school. And I was pretty sure of myself that I could, because back when I was younger, I was the kid shoveling the driveway during the blizzard in State College, Pennsylvania, so that I could shoot hoops while no one else was doing that. And I was also the kid who would take the train into Philadelphia when we moved closer to the city in 7th grade and play against the best competition I could. I was also the kid right before high school who was running 2 miles to the park, dribbling and shooting before it got hot. My dream was always to play college basketball. My dad believed in that dream, but he understood our family history maybe a little bit better than I did. I knew the stories of the aunts and uncles who gave up drinking and they had to give up partying because of how it was ruining their lives. I knew the story of my uncle who was kicked off his college basketball team because of smoking weed in college. I knew the story of a great-grandfather who drank himself to an early grave. But I was going to be different. And I chose a high school that was 45 minutes away from our house so that I could play against the best competition that the area provided. I played against kids who played on TV during their college years and in the NBA, and I was able to play against my grandfather's alma mater and make it to the playoffs and play on the floor where he played his college basketball at the University of Pennsylvania. But unfortunately, I lost the bet to my dad during my sophomore year. And I continued playing basketball, but my game plateaued as I started partying. I was able to get a college scholarship to a Division III school in Maryland, but when I got to the school, I had spent so much of my life fitting into one box that I realized I didn't want to do it anymore. And I never tried out. I never had a face-to-face meeting with the coach. I emailed him. I avoided him for those 4 years, even when I went to the gym to work out or to play pickup. I called my dad, and I was too young to really understand the sacrifice that parents make to drive their son across the eastern seaboard so he could play in tournaments all over the place and hang out in shitty high school gyms all summer so that he could get better. I held it together when I talked to him, but as soon as I hung up, I lost it. That was the first time I cried. I also had another dream. It's a weird dream in our day and age because of how we're compensated, but I always wanted to be a teacher, a high school teacher. And when I got to college, I enrolled in the secondary ed program with a history focus. And now that you have the context of how hard I worked as a basketball player, you can understand the context of how hard I worked as a partier now that I had all this free time. It's unfortunate, it's funny in some ways, but it's kind of makes my skin crawl to think that I would save up these 15-page papers for my history degree until 2 days before they were due, and I would write them with Ritalin, coffee, and cocaine. And then I was also I worked up my tolerance to be able to punish a full bottle of Yellowtail wine, the big ones, not the regular size bottle of wine, before we would even go out to the bar. And I was able to keep my mind in great shape because of all the hallucinogens I was taking. But it's terrible because also in my sophomore year, I started my student teaching experience at Wicomico Middle School in Salisbury, and the department head of that school looked at me and said, "This is the worst time for anyone to be getting into education." It was right when No Child Left Behind was passed. And I had already grown a little distasteful of the classes I was taking because we were just making the same portfolio over and over again in the education classes. And it didn't feel like it was going to be necessary for me to teach. That was the narrative I was telling myself. So Christmas break comes around in the middle of my sophomore year, and I tell my parents, and I don't really have the reasons beyond what I just told you, but I try to get it out, and I'm sobbing as I'm telling them because I know I'm really straying far from the person I grew up to be. Junior year, somehow I was still carrying a 3.3 GPA, even though I was partying as hard as I was. It was somewhat together, but as these things do, they snowball out of control. At the beginning of senior year, my roommate of 3 years started to mess around with heroin, and he was straight edge till we started hanging out. So senior year kind of spun out of control very quickly, and by the spring, he was full-on addicted to heroin. And my friends and I tried to do a really terrible intervention, and I say terrible because we didn't know what we were doing, and we should have had professionals involved. We ended up isolating him, and he would stop coming home. I stopped going to class. And one of my classes, short story, this is the last semester of senior year, I missed 11 of those classes. And on the syllabus, the professor wrote, "If you miss 5, you will fail this class." Well, I thought that I had taken his classes before he knew me. I'm a pretty harmless guy. I got all the A's on the exams. But when I handed in the the final exam, I shook his hand. He didn't say anything. I thought I was fine. 2 days later, I got the grade that I had failed his class. As well, that same week, I handed in a paper for modern poetry, and the professor emailed me and said, "Is this really your final paper?" I had emailed him a rough draft, and as out of shape as I was at this point, I ran 2 miles to his office and checked. And I had emailed the rough draft, and I ran 2 miles back to my house, and I didn't have a better draft. So after never failing a class in 16 years of education, I failed 2 in my last semester. And that week when my father came to pick me up from school after not coming for my graduation and packing all of that sadness into the car, it was raining, and I just started sobbing again. And that was the 3rd time I cried in college. And it was the weight of those lies. It was the bar that I had set for myself that I knew I was capable of reaching, that I never gave it enough of an effort. It was the guilt that led my friend down his dark path. Thankfully, he's still with us today in recovery. I had to go home to finish my college degree, and I was taking classes at Westchester University outside of Philadelphia, and I was working at the country club where I worked all through high school and college, and I was able to hang out with my friends from high school who were still partying like I was in college, and I needed a way out. And thankfully, I have an aunt and a family who live in Taos, New Mexico, and she had always told me that if I needed to get away from the East Coast, if I wanted to check out New Mexico after college, I could. So I reached out, and we set the time. I made it here in January of 2007, and I was 40 pounds heavier than I am now. I was unhealthy. I was pretty rudderless. And my aunt pushed me to start substituting at the schools in town, and I did that. And I owe so much to her for putting me on a path and giving me the opportunity to be in this town with so many amazing people. I owe her the joys of my career and the fruits of my marriage and the relationship that we have together and that I get to have with my cousins. And I'm telling you this tonight because the only other time that I've said this story in public is a time where you wouldn't think someone would say this. I was asked to give the commencement address at Vista Grande High School in 2012. And I told them my story. Usually commencement addresses are about how excited everyone is for you to graduate, how much you've accomplished. And they knew that because we had such a hands-on school and such a relationship-based school. They knew that I had that joy for them. But this was my last chance to talk to them. And I wanted to show them someone who I know that there's a lot of privilege involved with my ability to carry a 3.3 GPA into my senior year of college, despite all the terrible decisions I made, and that I could even get a college scholarship after not even being as hard of a worker as I should have been. But I think that on the dawn of a new school year, as I get to welcome all these students into my classroom again, some for the first time, I want them to see a person who has disappointed themselves. I want them to see a person who has self-sabotaged their dreams, that has experimented with life and failed in a lot of ways. The crazy thing about that, though, is that I got to go to college and do that. The young people in this town are often doing those things or experiencing that pain before they get to high school. And so I wanted them to see, I wanted the graduates in 2012 to hear, and I want to be an example for students that are coming into our schools, into the high school this year, that no matter what gets in your way, it will usually be yourself getting in your way. But no matter what gets in your way, there is always a future for you. And I think it's time to have these hard conversations with our young people, to bring this level of honesty and also to bring this level of understanding that at least we've been in your shoes, maybe not in the hard drugs that you've experienced in Taos, but the way that you have, all of us here, have experienced loss, sadness, disappointment. And I hope that I'm having that conversation in the right way. And I hope that the 12-year-old who made that bet with my father is looking at me today and can be proud of the man I've become. Thank you.
I know Ned's going to be a help for this next Misfits, which we are doing again, once again, for the youth, and that's going to be in November. Thank you all for coming out this evening so much. Thank you for supporting Shared Table. Do you guys have Facebook? I hate it. If you have it, we have a page, Misfits, Malcontents, and Mystics. That's my plug. If you can go there, if you can like it, it just garners more dollars for the next event that we have. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. Have a great night.